friends, in this video we will get an introduction about the serial communication interfacing standards. So let us start with our topic. Now, in this world, there are many devices, and these devices they communicate with each other. When we call communication, it means that the two devices they are transmitting the data between each other. Like one device, it will send the data, and the other device, it will receive the data. So this is called the data transmission, or we can say communication between the two devices. Now this communication, it can be of two types: serial communication and parallel communication. As most of the devices in the nature, they are parallel in their form, means they will use the parallel communication for the data transmission. So if here we have the sender and it is the receiver, and they are communicating with each other, means they are transmitting the data transmission is taking place. So this data transmission, I have told that it can be of two types: serial or parallel. In serial data transmission, one bit is transmitted at a time. Because when we talk about the telecommunication or the computers and microprocessors, if we talk about, then they deal with the data in the form of bits. The data is in the form of bits there. Bits means either 0 or 1. So in the form of zeros and ones, the computers, microprocessors and the telecommunication devices, they interact with each other. So if the data transmission is taking place in such devices, then in the case of serial transmission, one bit will be transmitted at a time. Whereas in the case of parallel, all the bits they are transmitted simultaneously. Now, as in the case of parallel, all bits are transferred simultaneously, whereas in serial, only one bit is transmitted. So here, only single line is required for transmitting the data. Whereas in this parallel, more number of cables are required. Okay. So we can say that in serial we will require less hardware because only single line is required, whereas in the case of parallel we will require more hardware, more cables are required because we have to transfer all the bits at the same time. Now when we are talking about the communication between the two components which are located at a very far distance from each other, means when we want to transmit the data over long distances. So for long distances, we prefer serial communication in place of parallel communication. Parallel communication is very fast because we are transmitting all the bits simultaneously, but it requires more number of cables, more hardware is required. So if we are transmitting for long distances, we have to put the lines from the source place to the destination place, and such a hardware for a long distance, it will be very bulky and very expensive. Okay, so for long distance communication we prefer serial communication in place of parallel communication. Now the devices like computers and microprocessor, they deals with data which is parallel in form, because I have said that the most of the devices, they are parallel in nature. So here we are transmitting the data in the form of serial data, that is serial data we are transmitting. But when that serial data it will received by a device which is dealing with the parallel data, so that serial data has to be converted into parallel form. So here we require the serial to parallel conversion. Also, because whenever the devices want to transmit the data, it is having with it the parallel data, and it has to transmit it in the form of serial data. So parallel to serial conversion is also required. So whenever we talk about the communication between two devices, the need is there for serial to parallel and parallel to serial conversion. And we always prefer the serial communication for the transmission of data over long distances. So we can say that overall this this serial communication is preferred. Okay, it has more advantages. Now this serial data transmission, it involves various process like whenever the data is transmitted, then from the sender to the receiver, then we have to specify that from where the data is starting, at what position the data is ending, what is the speed of the communication. All these things are to be specified whenever we are transmitting the data. So we can say that this serial data transmission. So this, whenever we are transmitting the data, we require the starting and the end of the transmission. It should be specified. Error verification should be there. And there are many processes which are involved in the case of serial data transmission. Like we require the interfacing requirements are there. Okay, etc. So many things are involved in the case of serial data transmission method. And one of this thing which is involved in this serial data transmission, one of the most important thing is that the interfacing requirements. Now in this interfacing requirements comes the interfacing standards. Here this word interfacing, it means that communication between two components. Communication is between two components. It is also termed as interfacing. So when two components they are communicating, we have to specify that what are the requirements of those two components, what is the specifications we should make there clear. So there is a need further specifying that what are the requirements of the two components, what are their specifications. So all that comes under the topic interfacing standards. So in this video, we will study about that what are the interfacing standards, and commonly used interfacing standards are what. Okay. So as I have said that most commonly we used serial communication for the data transmission. So this serial interfacing is used for various devices and for connecting the various equipment to the system. And in this serial communication, there is a need for the interfacing requirements are there. Now, why these interfacing requirements are needed? When two components they are communicating, then there may be like there can be various methods to connect these two devices. They can connect in various types, and various devices can be used to communicate with each other. So for that, there should be a particular standard that should be made. Standard means some rules should be defined that how these two devices they should be connected with each other, and that rules they should be followed by every country, because in every countries they have different technologies, they have different methods, they have different devices. So all these countries they have set a standard. They will use that standard for communication. Okay, so those are known as the interfacing standards, and because we are using the serial communication, so those standards are known as the serial communication interfacing standards. These standards are the rules, or we can say that particular devices which are specified, that whenever the communication is taking place, whenever data transfer is taking place, then these standards should be used. Okay, so the need of the standards comes from the point that common understanding is necessary among the technologies of different countries. So the need for these interfacing standards occur because we want that common understanding is present between the various manufacturers, such that a standard notation is followed for interfacing the equipments. Whenever interfacing is done between equipments, then there should be a particular standard, and that standard should be used by all the manufacturers, so that there is a common understanding between them. Now, who is going to define these standards? The IEEE, it sends the standards for the interfacing. So these standards they are provided by the IEEE, which is an international institute for the engineers. Engineers Association is there. So IEEE is the is the institute, is the international institute which sets the standard for all the engineering equipments. Okay, so it can be IEEE or any standard professional institute. They set the standard for the communication. Now, what these serial input output standards they specify? So these serial standards, communication standards, they must specify clearly the voltage levels, the speed of the data transfer, the length of the cables. Means when two equipments they are connected, then what would be the length of the cables between the two equipment? What should be the speed of the data transfer? What should be the voltage levels of the two equipments? So all these things are specified in the communication or the interfacing standards. So now when the data is transmitted, serial input output data is transmitted, it can be transmitted either in the form of current or the voltage. And when it is transmitted in the form of current, we usually use 20 milliamperes or 60 milliamperes current loops to transfer the data in the form of current. Okay, so the data, it can be transmitted either in the form of current or as voltage. So how we can transmit the data in the form of current? Suppose that the system is at logic 1, then the current flow will take place, and when the system is at logic 0, then the current flow will be stopped. So in this way, in the form of current and the voltage levels, the serial input output data, it can be transmitted. So when the data is transmitted in the form of current, then in the current loop method, the signals are relatively noise free, and this is best suited for long distance transmission. So we prefer that we are transmitting the data in the form of current in place of the voltage. So up till now, there are many interfacing standards which have been developed for the serial communication. So here we will study some of the names of the serial communication interfacing standards. There are many serial communication interfacing standards available and developed by the standard institutes like RS-232, and many more. So there are various interfacing standards available like RS-232, RS-422, 423, 485, Atari SIO, Universal Serial Bus, Firewire, Ethernet, Serial ATA, Space Wire, Spacecraft Communication Network, and many more. So all these are the various interfacing standards available in the market, which are used by the manufacturers for the interfacing of two equipments. Okay, now in these interfacing standards, the most commonly used interfacing standards are RS-232 and the Universal Serial Bus, Ethernet. These are the most commonly used interfacing standards for the serial communication. So in this video, we got an introduction about the serial input-output communication interfacing standards, that what are the use of these interfacing standards, why they are developed, why there is a need for them, and what are the interfacing standards which are commonly available in the market. So I hope that this topic is clear to you. Thank you.